I want to begin by asking you to take a deep breath in, hold it for a moment, and then breathe out slowly. There's something very powerful about being aware of our breath. Many religious traditions teach practices of prayer and meditation that begin by noticing our breath. It's a way of removing unnecessary distractions, of becoming present to a moment that we're in, rather than thinking of all the shopping lists or the Facebook posts and all the things that randomly come into your mind whenever you're trying to be quiet. The image of breath, though, is really important in the Christian tradition as well. From the beginning, in Genesis, we discover that having fashioned human beings from the soil of the earth, God breathes his own breath into the nostrils of this new being, and it suddenly becomes alive. Breath then is that symbolic link that we have to the divine. But we so quickly lose that sense of connection to God. And that's what sin is all about. It's that illusion that we are disconnected from God, that we are independent beings who can care for their own selves. And the Genesis story continues, and as it does, we discover these human beings building a tower up to heavens, and they think themselves to be like gods. It's a real basic problem for us. We forget our dependence on God, a dependence that's symbolized by breathing in and breathing out. But God doesn't let us forget so easily. From the very beginning, as sin is like a fog in our brains, making us believe that we are separate from God, God pursued us relentlessly. He chased down Abraham and made him all kinds of promises of being a father of many nations and so on. But the chief of the promises he made was that I will be with you wherever you go. To all the unknown and undiscovered places, I will be there with you. And he spoke to Moses and he invited him into a partnership that would liberate his people from slavery in Egypt. He spoke to the prophets, giving them words of rebuke and words of promise, reminding his people that he has not lost hope, that the relationship can still be restored. God is relentless in his desire to be with us. And that's the story of the Bible. And that story reaches its peak in Jesus. The Word became flesh, John's Gospel teaches us, and made his dwelling among us. The God who we imagined was far off showed us his desire always has been to be near to us, to be involved in the messiness of our lives. And Jesus' arrival is announced with a name, and Christmas is coming, and we're going to hear this again. But he is called Emmanuel, God with us. And he has come to deal with that fog of sin, that illusion of separation, once and for all. In our reading today, we meet Jesus speaking privately with his disciples. It's what scholars call the farewell discourse, a series of teachings and conversations Jesus has with his disciples in order to prepare them for what's coming next, his arrest, his crucifixion, his death, his resurrection, and his ascension. He tells them he won't be with them much longer. They were about to be thrown into a time of chaos. They would feel a separation anxiety unlike anything they had felt before. But Jesus wants to reassure them that he would be with them always. And while it might seem like he's going to leave them, he says, it's better for you that I go. Unless I go, he says, I cannot send the advocate to you. The advocate, the Holy Spirit, is the gift Jesus gave to his disciples. And do you know what the Greek word for the Spirit is? It's a Greek word pneuma, which in other contexts could quite easily be translated breath. The gift of the Spirit is the gift of deep intimacy with Jesus, a closeness which resembles the connection between our breath and our lungs. Jesus, the presence of God on earth, promises an even closer connection with his friends, closer than our breath is to our lungs. And if you read on in John's Gospel in chapter 20, after resurrection, Jesus comes to his disciples and he fulfills his promise. He breathes on them and he says, receive the Holy Spirit. So we come back to that powerful image. God is close to us, like our breath is close to our lungs. And the circle has been restored. The illusion that we are separate from him has been banished, and we now carry within us divine breath. That breath that makes all things alive is living in us, and he will never leave us or forsake us. I think we really need to hear that truth again, especially as we wrestle with this shaky reality of life, a life lived in a time of coronavirus. We might find ourselves wondering where God is. We might begin to feel isolated and alone. But God comes to us today and he reminds us of that eternal truth. I will be with you always. He reminds us that from the very beginning that has been his desire. And in the chaos of our lives and the troubles that can cloud our vision, we need to listen carefully for his words of reassurance and his words of promise. But sometimes we really do feel a sense of disconnection from God. We feel an absence. Yet, although it might sound counterintuitive to you, that sense of absence might well be a healthy part of our journey. Jesus says, I must leave you. They would no longer have the luxury of his presence with them. They could no longer simply turn to him and ask him things. They could no longer sit and have a meal, relaxing with him. They will no longer see him doing wonders. They will no longer just be able to simply enjoy being with him on the journey of life. But until he leaves them, they cannot truly understand him. You'll notice an interesting transition that happens in these disciples' lives. During his time with them, Jesus constantly asked them, why do you not yet understand what I'm telling you? Time and again, they misunderstand him. Time and again, he has to rebuke them for being so slow, for missing the point. But then after his resurrection and ascension, they suddenly realize what it all means. And they then become teachers, the ones he has entrusted with his story and his wisdom, the ones he sends out to share with the whole world. His absence was necessary. And in a strange way, it helped them to become even closer to him. You might understand that dynamic in your own relationships today. Perhaps during lockdown, we've been kept away from people we would normally spend time with. And although I'm not suggesting this is a good thing necessarily, maybe you've discovered a deeper closeness with people as well. Maybe that you've found that having to communicate in new ways gives you an appreciation of someone that you didn't have before. When you'd meet in person and you could enjoy time together, But now all you can do is perhaps write a letter. Suddenly those letters become very special. And I think there are moments on the spiritual journey when we have a sense of God's absence, but maybe they're necessary. And maybe they can become for us a moment of growth, a moment of deeper intimacy with God. And maybe lockdown might help us understand that dynamic a little bit better. But Jesus doesn't stay absent for long, and his gift soon arrives, and the disciples are filled with his presence. And they begin to become more fully what he had called them to be. They discover in themselves a new boldness, a boldness to go out into a scary world and take Jesus with them. And that's where I'd like to end our reflections today. To encourage you to remember how close Jesus is to us, how present he has become by his Holy Spirit, and to discover afresh a new boldness that won't be hindered by all the anxiety of our times. A boldness that sees the destruction of COVID-19 and how it has damaged our church life, but refuses to give in. A boldness that trusts God for tomorrow, so lives today with energy and determination. Because we trust that he is with us. And if we can trust that, we can venture into the world with courage, with expectation, and with deep peace. So how do we remember that he is with us? Well, there are two main tried and tested ways. Firstly, acts of service. Jesus himself said that if we could love others, we will discover him in unexpected places, particularly in the lives of those who are struggling, the poor and the hungry and so on. He says, what you do for these, you will do to me. You will discover me there. And every day we have chance to do that. We may not have the chance to feed the hungry. We may not have the chance to do big acts of service, but small things we can do. And in doing those small things, we discover Christ with us. But there's another way we can remember him with us, and that is to pray. Again, back to where I began, a prayer life that seeks to become conscious of God with us. It might begin by taking a deep breath in, holding it, and letting it out slowly. And as that breath enters our lungs, we remember that that is how God is with us, closer than the breath in our lungs. We might develop a prayer life which is centered on listening to God, paying attention to where he is at work in our lives and in the world outside. At the moment, for weekday evenings, I've been doing a series of sessions on Facebook Live called Compline at Clarence. And that's a perfect opportunity to seek to discern God's presence in our day. We pause, we look back on the day, and we discover perhaps things that we have missed, that God has been there with us all along. A regular reminder that he's always there, that we are never alone. And if we have open eyes to see, we'll discover him walking this journey of life with us. And we have no reason to be afraid. So let's end as we began, taking a deep breath in, holding it for a moment, and then breathing out. God is closer to us than we can imagine. May you discover a renewed courage to live through anxious times, knowing that he is there with you. May you find him at work in unexpected ways, in unexpected places. And may you learn how to practice the presence of God in your everyday life. And through it all, may you always remember that you belong to God, and He has promised never to leave you or forsake you. Whatever life is like for you today, He is there. He is with you. May that bring you a measure of comfort and of resolve today. Amen.